I can see people coming in. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Let's wait a few more seconds because I can see people checking in as I speak. I hope you can hear me loud and clear. Roberto Benetello, and I'm the Executive Director of Business Council for Sustainable Development in Malaysia. Welcome to this webinar entitled The Business Case for Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services. This event is brought to you by BCSD Malaysia and our event partner, the World Business Council for Sustainable Development, WBCSD. It is also our pleasure to be able to collaborate with the British High Commission in Kuala Lumpur. In fact, this webinar, if everything is okay technically, should be also broadcast by the British High Commission here in Kuala Lumpur as part of the event Malaysian Nature Tours, a pre-event of Leaders Ambition Summit happening on the 12th of December. We seek this opportunity to thank all the supporting partners for this event. Let's name a few: ADEX, the UN Climate Change Conference UK 2021, COP26, the Great Britain Campaign, and the World Wildlife Fund, WWF. I wish to start by thanking all attendees for spending your afternoon with us today. Thank you very much. It's really appreciated. And I also want to thank the distinguished speakers that have agreed to be with us today and take time off their busy schedule. We will introduce them one by one in just a few moments. Ladies and gentlemen, before we go into the topic of the day, allow me to remind you who we are. We are the Business Council for Sustainable Development Malaysia, also known as BCSD Malaysia Berhad. We are a CEO-led no-profit organization formed by a group of forward-thinking companies committed to creating a sustainable future for business, society, and the environment. We are the global network partner in Malaysia of the World Business Council for Sustainable Development, WBCSD. And together with our members, we want to drive systems transformation, which is essential to transition to a world where 9.7 billion people will be able to live well and within the boundaries of the planet by 2050, by mid-century. At the same time, we strive to make more sustainable business more successful. And for us, it's very important to create and to establish and to prove with strong evidence that there is a link between the sustainability performance of companies and the long-term success. And their long-term success. Like WBCSD, we work with business mostly around 6 main program areas where systems transformation is needed. These areas are a circular economy, cities and mobility, climate and energy, food and nature, social issues and human rights, reporting, disclosure, and governance. In this area, we initiate projects. So we are very much project oriented with concrete and measurable output. They all take a science-based approach and aim for targeted business solutions to scale up business impact. If we look at WBCSD at global level, they currently have 36 active global projects producing impact worldwide. But on top of that, there are hundreds of local projects from the 62 WBCSD global network partners around the world. These are companies, these are organizations like BCSD Malaysia and the BCSDs in the Asia Pacific region that you see in this slide. The knowledge generated through the global and the local projects by WBCSD and by the various BCSDs around the world is used to initiate and replicate projects in some other parts of the world. And this is very important because this approach leverages on our successes and it minimizes wasting time and resources to reinvent the wheel. Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to introduce to you the moderator for today's webinar. Is none other than Dato Bakar Jaafar, Chairman of the Malaysian Green Technology and Climate Change Center, MGTC, Vice President of Academy of Sciences Malaysia, Director of BCSD Malaysia, we need to remember that, Professor at UTM Perdana, Center Razak Faculty of Technology and Informatics, and is also Research Fellow of the UTM Ocean Thermal Energy Center. Dato Bakar is our moderator for today. And without further ado, I'll hand over to you, Dato Bakar, for the rest of the program. I hope you enjoy the webinar. Thank you.
More than half of the global economy depends on the prosperity of the natural world. From the water we drink, the food we grow, and the resources we use in manufacturing. Ecosystems constitute the abundance of natural capital that is needed to sustain communities and businesses. Understanding the matter and impact of biodiversity and ecosystem decline is crucial to curtailing further damage and to make informed decisions that prioritize a more sustainable future. The fundamental steps in preserving ecosystem services are the economic valuation of the services as well as the adoption of standardized frameworks for businesses. That is to identify, measure, and value their impact. We all could see that ecosystem services play an important role in our daily lives. Now let us employ a proactive lens on this topic and ask ourselves some important questions. How could business benefit from integrating impacts to nature into the risk assessment? And also, how should businesses disclose nature-related financial risk to build a more resilient business? In today's webinar, our speakers will be providing discourse on these very interesting questions. Ladies and gentlemen, the agenda for today includes 5 experts that have been selected to tell a compelling story about the state of the art, as well as sharing insights and opportunities from their respective sectors. With me today, we have our founding chairman of Business Council for Sustainable Development Malaysia, Professor Tan Sri Dr. Zakri Abdul Hamid. He is the Ambassador and Science Advisor to the Campaign for Nature, former UN official, and a Senior Fellow of the Academy of Sciences, Malaysia. Tan Sri Zakri has had a distinguished career in science as a researcher, educator, administrator, diplomat, also as the former science advisor to the former Prime Minister of Malaysia. Tan Sri, you'll be kickstarting the session with a keynote on the prospects of biodiversity business in Malaysia. Our second speaker, it is our honor to have Dr. Peter White, Ambassador for Biodiversity and Convention for Biodiversity, COP15, and at World Business Council for Sustainable Development. As a biologist and global sustainability leader, Dr. White will tell us why it is time to value nature and integrating nature into business. Our third speaker, next, we are going to have my fellow colleague at ASM, Dr. Helen Nair, the Chair of Academy of Sciences Malaysia, Special Interest Group in Biodiversity. Dr. Nair will be sharing with us the newly emerging area of precision biodiversity and its business opportunities. Our fourth speaker is Ms. Angelia Chin, Paribas Asset Management Malaysia, and she'll be sharing her insights on preserving biodiversity and the steps BNP Paribas Asset Management Malaysia have taken to address the issue. Ms. Angelia's presentation is entitled Building a Resilient Global Economy with Natural Capital. Last but not the least, definitely not, our last speaker, Dr. Surina Ismail. She's a Group Head of Sustainability at IOI Corporation Berhad. She will illustrate a practical approach for the integration of biodiversity and conservation in the palm oil sector. After the presentation by all speakers, we will also have an exciting panel discussion followed with a question and answer to last for about 30 minutes. Please use the Q&A function to post your questions. We will try to answer as many as we can. Ladies and gentlemen, before I invite our first speaker, allow me to share with you a couple of housekeeping items. First, the whole proceeding of our webinar is being recorded. Every speaker is given only 10 minutes for presentation. As I was saying, there will be 30 minutes panel discussion and Q&A sessions at the end of all the presentations. Participants will be kept on mute during this proceeding. However, feel free to type your questions in the Q&A panel. I hope you enjoy this webinar, and please do not hesitate to get in touch with us at BCSD Malaysia through this email. Further ado, let's give the floor to the speakers. And Tan Sri Zakri, the floor now is yours. Tan Sri.
Thank you, Dato Bakar, Roberto, fellow panelists, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Let me welcome you to this webinar convened by the Business Council on Sustainable Development Malaysia, which you may not really see the connection, but let me tell you, biodiversity or biodiversity loss is as crucial as climate change. In fact, these two topics are two grand challenges facing the world, and we should be ready to help solve them. Ladies and gentlemen, this morning I was involved with the British High Commissioner to Malaysia to launch his nature tour. He's very interested in nature. But before I go any further, let me reflect. I think many of you, all of you here, knows about Charles Darwin, right? Charles Darwin, theory of evolution by natural selection. There is another person, his contemporary, who is a naturalist, and he worked in Malaysia. The name is Alfred Russel Wallace. That was in the 1800s, you know. And Alfred Russel Wallace is being copied by the British High Commissioner to do a tour of the biodiversity in Malaysia. Of course, Wallace was living in more challenging times. In fact, I was told he concocted his theory of natural selection when he was having malaria at the foot of Gunung Ledang. So that is the context, the romance of Malaysia as one of the 12 or 17 mega diverse countries in the world. The biodiversity is beyond comparison. That is a long time ago, ladies and gentlemen. But today, biodiversity is under threat. 60% of the ecosystem services that humans depend on, and that includes food, feed, water, and clean air. 60% of these ecosystem services are being degraded. And a recent report last year showed that 1 million species are under threat. And all this bad news, ladies and gentlemen, is due to the activities of one species, and that's Homo sapien, the human species. You know, through our activities, we have destroyed the so-called web of life. So when you talk about the business of biodiversity, it is nothing, you know, to something else which is bigger, and that is the survival of the human species. So in that context, during the Rio Summit in 1992, there are 3 UN treaties being signed. One is the UN Framework Convention to combat desertification. Second one was the UN Framework Convention on climate change, UNFCCC. And the third one, the UN Biodiversity Treaty, or the Convention on Biological Diversity, who had 3 main objectives. Number 1, conservation of biodiversity. Second, sustainable use of biodiversity. And third one, access and benefit sharing of genetic resources. The third objective is directly relevant to the business of biodiversity. So that was more than 30 years ago. More than 30 years ago, the international community has developed targets to halt biodiversity loss, but to no avail. The latest one was initiated 10 years ago, called the Aichi Biodiversity Target. We did it, we initiated it in 2010. This year, 2020, almost all of the goals set by the international community was not achieved. So next year, during the Conference of Parties or the convention in Kunming, China, we are again trying to restart a process of halting biodiversity by 2030. So you may ask, why are we still in that position? One of the reasons, ladies and gentlemen, is the lack of understanding of the public, of the policy makers, the politician, why biodiversity is so essential to our life. Secondly, we don't have champions. You remember the IPCC on climate change? They were also unknown until they latched on to Vice President Al Gore, who championed climate change, and the rest was history. The IPCC and Al Gore received Nobel Peace Prize. So the IPBES, this is the Intergovernmental Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, tried the same, but we have not reached that point yet. What I'm trying to say here, there's a lot of science involved, but the science has not filtered down rightly. But just to end on this particular point, there's a ray of hope on the horizon. For Malaysian, you recall, for more than 1 year, there is a group trying to halt the de-gazettement of the Kuala Langat Forest Reserve. You remember the Selangor government was trying to de-gazette this forest reserve to no avail. But through a lot of work of the NGOs, the Orang Asli and others, it's amazing. Last month, November 11, in the Selangor State Assembly, all the politicians from both sides of the aisle, so to speak, unanimously vote that the plan to de-gazette the land should not proceed. It's amazing, isn't it, given Malaysian politics, that they can come together. What I'm saying here, if the message is packaged right, that message would be taken up constructively. So those are some of the things, but I wanted to come back again to the potentials of biodiversity as a business proposition. In fact, the private sector has been not as close to the issue as it needs to be, but things are improving. And I think one of the players here, Peter White, would tell us is the work of the World Business Council on SD, who's also interested in the subject. So during the last decade, there's been growing corporate awareness of the importance of ecosystem services and biodiversity in providing and maintaining those goods and services that we depend in our life. There is increasing interest. How do you assess, evaluate, and eventually realize the economic potential of biodiversity? In the webinar I was participating this morning, the WWF rep was telling us in the WWF Index 2018, nature is estimated to have a value of $125 trillion US. So it's really a very big figure, of course, that encompasses all sectors of life. But it's tremendous. But right now, we haven't gone really towards that phase. In Malaysia, there have been a good awareness about the value of biodiversity. I think we'll hear more from our speakers from the corporate sector. But let me cite a few ongoing work undertaken by our corporate sector. One is, of course, the Sime Darby plantation, which oversees a biodiversity conservation initiative that has the largest collection of endangered, rare, and threatened tree species. They are undertaking a conservation work on 200 hectares of land in Termelo, Pahang. That is a good start, I think. Of course, they can do more. Petronas, our national oil company, also with the cooperation of the Sarawak Forestry Corporation, had been involved in this so-called project called Beacon, Biodiversity, Environment and Conservation Project, in which they deployed almost 1,500 units of artificial reef balls across an area of over 120 kilometers square in the Simi Lajau National Park, waters off the coast of Bintulu. So those are two examples of ongoing project. The third one is, I think, from Nestle Malaysia, which recently announced that they are into tree planting, millions of trees across the famous Kinabatangan wetlands in Sabah, and also along the central forest spine and in the Malay Peninsula. Those are well and good, but still these are one-off things by individual companies. I think now there is a need for the corporate sector in Malaysia to get together and to see how we could involve ourselves in the economics of biodiversity. There are several approaches to that. I think one of the approach that was suggested was the so-called smart target, having business can follow a series of steps toward creating internal smart targets, namely specific, measurable, ambitious, realistic, and time-bound, which can include the following. One is incorporating biodiversity in their strategies. Two, incorporating target setting in their plans for actions to address environmental issues. And three, business where dependencies or impacts on biodiversity are high, need to be prioritized for faster action. Let me conclude by suggesting a few practical tools that the BCSD Malaysia can undertake with your support. And that is, we are contemplating of establishing the so-called Malaysian platform for business and biodiversity, which could take a leadership role in the following areas. Number one, encouraging companies to integrate biodiversity and ecosystem services into their environmental and sustainability management system. Two, supporting individual companies' commitment towards biodiversity conservation and sustainable use. Three, participating in the development of biodiversity business cases and practical business opportunities for action. Next one, serving as a platform for learning from each other on how to improve biodiversity management. And finally, engaging in national and international dialogue with civil society and governments, and forging new alliances to achieve goals together. Of course, again, I must say, the World Business Council on Sustainable Development has done a lot of work here, and we don't have to start from square one. There are entry points that could propel Malaysia to be a leading nation with full corporate responsibility towards conservation and sustainable use, and in the process, enhance your business opportunities. So once again, Dato Bakar, thank you for giving me the opportunity to say a few words. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tan Sri Zakri. Very excellent presentations, as usual, with impressive prescriptions, which should follow up after this. Our next speaker is Dr. Peter White, Ambassador for Biodiversity and CBD COP15 at World Business Council for Sustainable Development. Dr. Peter White, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon, everybody. It's a great pleasure to be with you. I'm speaking to you from a very cold, dark, and wet England, and I would love to be with you in Malaysia in person, but hopefully that will come another day. But very pleased to be here to speak to you about the time to value nature. I'd like to show you this. This was my favorite cartoon that was published in the early days of the COVID pandemic. And apart from the fact it's quite humorous, it's very serious. And I particularly like it for three reasons. Firstly, the world was focused on COVID, and this drew attention to the fact that there were other issues potentially much, much bigger coming down the track. Secondly, it was the first time in the mainstream media, I think, that I had seen biodiversity collapse actually get a mention. And this was in a mainstream publication. So it was great to actually see it, and also to see the size of the wave that it was considered to be. But thirdly, I think, and very importantly, it was great to see all of these things on the same page, because they are inevitably all linked together, and we tend to talk about them separately. But one thing we have learned from the COVID pandemic is that all these systems are connected, and issues around COVID, health, disease, climate, nature loss, and economics and prosperity are all intimately connected and will influence each other going forward. So great to have them all together. We will not be able to solve the climate change crisis unless we address nature and nature loss, because nature-based solutions can contribute something around 30+% of the emissions reductions, the sequestration that we need to fight climate change. We will never be able to deal with nature loss unless we access the work on climate, and particularly some of the climate finance. All of these things will have a huge impact on the world going forward in terms of economics. And the whole idea of building back better is building back a world post-COVID that is built on nature preservation and also on addressing the climate change. So I just give you that as a picture to hold in your mind as to why these things are important and how they're all connected. Now, you might say, well, what about COVID? Why COVID linked to biodiversity loss? Well, increasingly, there's also a link there, because the zoonotic diseases, many of the new diseases we've had recently, including COVID and MERS and SARS and Zika, are zoonotic diseases that come from wildlife. And the more that we have influence and degrade ecosystems, the more close the interactions we have with nature, the more likely we are going to have more zoonotic diseases going forward. And if you look where emerging diseases have come from in the past 15 years, over 60% have actually originated in countries where nature is in danger and where there is that degradation. Now, I'm not saying that nature loss caused COVID, but it's very closely linked to the rise and increasing prevalence of zoonotic disease. So COVID and nature loss and climate and economy are all intimately linked together. And we have to deal with them together if we're going to actually come up with solutions in the future that are better than the solutions we tried in the past. It's not that we haven't been warned. every year, the World Economic Forum have a risk report. And if you look, this was the risk report for this year. This was really pre-pandemic. All 5 of the top most likely risks are green, they're environmental, and 3 of the biggest impact ones are green, they're environmental. And biodiversity loss is in the top 5 for likelihood of happening. It's also in the top 5 of potential impact going forward as well. So it's not that we haven't been warned. Over 44 billion worldwide is actually linked to business that is either linked to high or medium nature dependency. It's not just the WEF who've been saying this. We've just heard the mention of IPBES, the Intergovernmental Panel on Business Ecosystem Services. Their big report in 2019 said that there's about a million species at risk. They identified the 5 leading drivers of biodiversity loss as land use change, depletion of resources, climate change, pollution, and the introduction of alien species. So we know what the causes are. We know what the size of the problem is. And increasingly this year, there have been more reports from the World Economic Forum about nature risk rising, why this is important, the size of the issue. And more recently, a report on the future of nature and business. There will be a report coming out on financing. If you want to have, these reports are available, the full reports on the WEF website. If you would like a business summary, WBCSD provides business summaries which are freely available if you just go to our website. One of the good things about the WEF report, The Future of Nature Business, it's not just about doom and gloom and the problems, it's also about opportunity, because they identify the areas that need to be addressed, work on food, land and oceans, energy and extractives and infrastructure and the built environment. And the opportunity there of dealing with biodiversity and dealing with nature loss is actually worth somewhere around $10 trillion and will lead to the creation of 395 million jobs by 2030. So this is not just risk, it's also opportunity. And that theme will come out in the UK government has a report coming out, the Dasgupta report. It's a review that actually says that the management of nature is mismanagement of a natural resource, of an asset. And looking at it in economic terms, the interim report came out earlier this year. We expect the full report in the spring next year. But again, that will talk about how we deal with nature as an asset class, how we deal with soils, how we deal with other natural assets, and how we can bring the economics in to actually drive investment in some of these areas. It's clear that there is a risk for business. There's a risk of not doing anything, and that risk is manifold. And the clear financial risk, companies that depend on natural systems. If you're an agricultural company, soil is a valuable asset. There's legal risk around regulatory issues, operational risk around the use of ecosystem services, things like pollinators. And there's always a reputational risk in these areas going forward if you're dealing with consumers who are increasingly interested in nature and biodiversity issues. So what is it that business can actually do? Well, I think it comes down to, there are 4 simple areas that WBCSD and the Coalition Business for Nature, which has been formed to present a business voice going forward, particularly around the CBD COP next year. I mean, for individual businesses, the key thing is working through their own operations and supply chains, identifying what is material, what's important, and dealing with that. You have to deal at an ecosystem level, so identifying who the other actors are in your ecosystems. But what we're talking about today is the third piece. How do you implement systemic change? How do you build nature into the decision-making processes at all levels, particularly within business, but also eventually within government? This whole idea of mainstreaming is something that will be key to the convention, the Global Biodiversity Framework that will be discussed and hopefully agreed in Kunming next year. The idea that nature has to be at the heart of decision-making and investment. And I'll deal with those briefly. Other speakers will deal with them in more detail, particularly around how we implement nature into decision-making at all levels. One of the key areas of solutions that has come up is the whole idea of nature provides solutions, and the idea of nature-based solutions, using nature as green infrastructure, using nature to provide clean water, to regulate climate, to provide food and health. This is an area that's come up, and many companies are very interested in this whole area. There's been a lot of work recently by IUCN on this whole issue of nature-based solutions, how nature can be used for benefits, particularly around climate, but also around food, health, and other areas. And just to flag, just this week, the WBCSD, we launched a report on accelerating business solutions for climate and nature. If you would like to see the report, I will put the link in the chat so you can get hold of it, basically to actually help clarify this whole area and stimulate investment in solutions, actions that are good for climate, good for nature, and good for business and for people. The whole area of valuing nature, how do you actually get nature and biodiversity into decision-making? There's been a lot of work in this area from WBCSD and from others. This culminated in the natural capital protocol, a way of actually assessing your natural capital, and also work on the social and human capital protocol. Together they've come together to provide the capitals coalition, so that we have a way to actually bring together natural capital, social and human capital, so that you can put it with financial capital in any decision-making process and investment decision going forward. And lots of companies are experimenting in this. So there are lots of efforts to have an environmental profit and loss and natural balancing, natural accounts, so nature-based accounts at a country level as well as a company level. We're going through a lot of experimenting, and what we are seeing is some convergence. If we think back, one of the biggest areas in the climate discussion that caused a lot of progress was the creation of the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures. This originally is voluntary, but was likely to become mandatory, that companies will be required to report against their climate risks, and also to run scenarios of what their business would look like in a 2-degree or a 1.5-degree world, because that's what investors want to know. What is the resilience of their business going forward? Well, the same thing needs to be done on the nature side. We need to be able to find a way to assess the nature risk of businesses, but also of countries. And so work is afoot at the moment, and I think BNP Paribas, who was speaking later, are part of this work too. And WBCSD is part of the working group to see if we can come up with a task force on nature-related financial disclosure. So we have a way of actually assessing risk and opportunity so that investors in companies and in economies can actually make sure that nature is taken into account and that nature-based solutions can be invested in going forward. One word about the last thing that companies can do, and that is around advocacy. One of the things that WBCSD and others, such as the ICC, WWF, the World Economic Forum, decided we need a common a business voice, a voice for business on nature. And so we created a coalition called Business for Nature. It does what it says on the tin. It represents business on nature. That coalition was launched last year. And the aim is to create a strong business voice going into the discussions of the Convention on Biological Diversity, CBD, but also the climate COP26 that you heard about earlier in the UK next year. The Business for Nature has formulated 5 key policy asks that they are saying that to governments that we need: the need for targets, the need for coherent policy, the need to value and embed nature in decision making, that's what we've been talking about today, the need to provide incentives and reform subsidies, and the need to work together. If anybody is interested in the work of Business for Nature, Business for Nature has put out a call to action. This was presented at the Biodiversity Summit in New York and online earlier in September. More than 600 businesses have already signed up to this. If your business is interested in supporting this voice on nature and calling for ambitious policies, please look at the Business for Nature website and sign up. Well, this is an open list, and we'll be taking this to Kunming next year. So you can see it's a complete, it's a global operation to bring together leading companies, urging governments to adopt policies to reverse nature loss in this decade. And if anybody wants any information on Business for Nature, I'll be happy to provide that. So on that, I will conclude. Thank you for your time and happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Dr. Peter White. Very impressive presentation. And our next speaker is Dr. Helen Nair, Chair of Academy of Sciences Malaysia, Special Interest Group on Biodiversity. And I note that we are running out of time and hope the rest of the speakers try to, stick to your schedule time slot. Thank you, Dr. Helen. The floor is yours. Yeah, thank you.
Please, Dr. Helen, mute yourself.
Yeah. Can you unmute? Yeah.
Sorry. Okay. Yep. Once again, thank you very much to the chair. Actually, I'm in Singapore, crossed over the straits to be here, and I'm in a hotel under quarantine. But here we are, and I'm ready to speak to you about precision biodiversity and its business opportunities. May I see the next slide, please? The important thing is that Dr. Peter White has made it easier for me because he has already put the platform up there to explain how COVID-19 pandemic has impacted us because of anthropogenic activities. Man has come in and done tremendous damage, which then has allowed for a free pathway for microbes resident in wildlife to cross over to humans. And as Prof. Tan Sri Zakri pointed out, the global biodiversity outlook that was released in September this year gave a dismal report of alarming failure on the part of all the plans that were laid out in 2010. However, they don't want to be despondent, and they were looking forward to Vision for Biodiversity in 2050, which then will, looking at biodiversity as a valued and conserved, and that it is restored and wisely used. Now, what is important inside this consideration is business as usual is not an option, and new approaches are required. And this was also emphasized by Dr. Peter. Current methods for monitoring and managing ecosystems globally have not been effective enough. And this is making it difficult, but fortunately, fortunately, we know that even the big computer companies like Microsoft have now realized that they must harness next generation precision technologies in order to address climate change as well as biodiversity issues. So when Planetary Computer was launched in January 2020, it was clear that trillions of data points will now be available for amassing information and to monitor activities of humans, animals, fishes, birds, and plants on the ground, in the sky, or at sea. So they are well ahead. And we, from the ASM SRG group, have also come in with precision biodiversity, which is set to complement current methods. Now, basically, one needs a kind of a definition for precision biodiversity. It is a complementary next generation technological approach to restore, conserve, and monitor and manage biological resources by the use of advanced technology platforms, for protection of the planet, as well as for socioeconomic returns, but always mindful that one size doesn't fit all, just as it was put forward for precision medicine. The major technology drivers are going to be, of course, the computer and communications technology, but also biotechnology. In Malaysia, ever since 2005 and the national biotech policy, we have been building a lot of capability in biotechnology. However, you'll see later that we have not harnessed the benefits from that. So we need biosciences running properly, and if precision biodiversity is applied correctly, these uncertainties related to managing natural resources will definitely be addressed, and we will get optimum deployment for profitability and sustainability, as well as protection of the environment. So when we merge together the technologies of biotechnology and biosciences with the emerging technologies of AI, etc., which the country is rolling out under the 4IR plan, we know that the country will benefit from building up genome database for Malaysia's flora and fauna. It will then be able to become a global player, as the valuable resources can be used for conservation, agriculture, medicine, and for the growing global bioeconomy. But it must not be forgotten that all new technologies need to be cleared through ethics and value-driven considerations to ensure that safety of people and the planet remains a top priority. We would like very much to create then a national gene bank for germplasm resources in Malaysia, and maybe then we will be linked to the international efforts like Genome 10K and 10KP. Now, okay, we've got these two great ideas, that we've got the technologies, we've got conservation and preservation, etc., and managing our biodiversity on the side. But there's a big gap in between. We need a bridge. And this is where the 10 by 10 MySTI framework, which was announced by the Honorable Minister of Science, Technology and Environment 2 days ago, is in place now, absolutely, for us to bridge that gap and to be able to roll out efforts that would help the business side to address business as well as biodiversity issues. Let's go on. So this in general is what the 10 by 10 is. It involves 10 Malaysia socioeconomic drivers and 10 science and technology drivers. These 10, and one corner on the right is environment and biodiversity. It will use the 10 S&T drivers in order to make it realize that all these socioeconomic drivers will benefit from these high-end technologies, which are part of this. Has been approved by our National Science Council, and it is going to form the framework for what is ahead of us in up to at least 2030 and beyond. Let's go on. Now, when we talk about these wonderful technologies, etc., it is no good if you don't have the ecosystem. And this is where Professor Mahendran from Monash University and his team worked with the ASM team in order to come out with not only the MySTIE, which I mentioned earlier, but also for this framework, which is called the 8 Eyes and constitutes the DNA of the precision biodiversity ecosystem. You will see the 8 Eyes reflect all the thoughts which have come out of Tan Sri Zakri's thinking, as well as Dr. Peter White's thinking. We need to have the right infrastructure, intellectual capital, as well as an internationalization of ideas and cooperation and interaction in order to provide the ecosystem which will see us joining business with biodiversity. That's the reason why biodiversity has failed, we feel, because the business side cannot see where they can get some benefit and where careers and new opportunities will come out. My next few slides, I hope, will show you how this is possible. Strong biodiversity culture and an ecosystem in Malaysia will translate into several spillover impacts on other socio-economic drivers. And this is the connection that I'm showing you here, so that a whole lot of new sectors can spawn up inside this kind of scenario. Can we go on, please? Because we don't have too much time. What also was put forward by Prof. Mahendran's team was that this is possible to be realized in various parts of the country, East Malaysia and the peninsula, merely by going down to those particular points. Next one, please. And working the 10-10 STI plan at the various localities. But again, one size does not fit all. So we must be very careful how this is rolled out. And it's the business sector that will buy into this and be able to show it. Let's move on. So let's see what is the global picture then for bioscience technology. And because of the great amount of monies that seem to be possible, that are already predicted, will be spun out through bioscience technology in the world, we in Malaysia need to be ready to move in. Let's go to the next slide, please. So in the global market, this is the potential. So my learned audience, many of you are from the business sector or the academic world or the community. Please look in here and see where you can interface and come in together to get some fraction of these global figures, which are part of a study that was recently conducted by BCSD. Let's go on. So in Malaysia, I just mentioned the MySTIE. So then you begin to think, right, but how does it apply? I mentioned earlier on the National Biotech Plan. It was a glorious plan, came in 2005, capacity building, science to business activities, global presence, etc. But can you see? The compound annual growth rate was steadily going down until at 2030, we expect only a 2% growth. Up at the top, which you may not be able to see, is the failure of the ecosystem. Earlier, I showed you what was necessary, but that failure is what has led to this. So it has contributed to a kind of a very slow growth rate, and there's nothing much happening. Let's move on. But if we now move from that status quo towards implementing the 10 by 10 with all the ecosystem taken care of, which is shown in the little box at the top, then we can expect a partial spillover coming from the MySTIE effort so that our revenue will go up. And the compound annual growth rate will now increase to 5% instead of being at 2%. And we could see an increase of even 243 billion ringgit. This also was projected by Professor Mahendran's work and his team. He is also part of the audience and will be very happy to take questions later. But let's go to the last one. When you see this, it is because that spillover effect, when you have the full spillover effect, lodging into precision agriculture, precision medicine, and into the halal sector, and into clinical trials, and what was announced by the young Berhad Khairi Jamaluddin 2 days ago, even a vaccine hub. Well, with that kind of stimulus and backing from the government, we can see that we would even be able to go right up to about 307 billion ringgits from a static 181 billion, which was there as we came into 2020 and all that we would have got by 2030. So a leapfrogging ecosystem with a full spillover impact will bring us this. Let's move on. So I can conclude then by saying The global COVID-19 pandemic has sounded the alarm. There's no doubt about it. It's a clarion wake-up call to warn the world to stop the wanton destruction of natural resources and ecosystems that can open the door to human-wildlife interaction and zoonosis. Malaysia, as the 12th most mega biodiverse country in the world, should be a global leader, and it is our responsibility to maintain conservation and biodiversity management. By adopting precision biodiversity, it is our contention that the country will show the world how next generation technologies never tried before in our country, and definitely in the world too, it has not come out as well as it should. We will be able to protect the planet as well as for socioeconomic returns, with the Rakyat getting not just ROI, but ROV, so that it is a non-physical value that comes in. But we need the quadruple helix rolling in and backing it and working as a whole in order to have this collaborative approach to for both the national and international level. Let's go on. And finally, if the 1010 MySTI framework cascades to the localities, we will set the stage for Malaysia to be a global leader in the application of precision biodiversity, thanks to Microsoft's prodding, to support both the UN Convention on Biodiversity, which Tan Sri Zakri mentioned, as well as the Sustainable Development Goals, besides creating exciting new careers and business opportunities, as it is precisely applied, recognizing that always that one size doesn't fit all. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Helen. And I'm very happy that you have introduced a new dimension, the E dimension, the economic dimension to STI.
Yes, absolutely. It's very important.
Yang Berhad Hari, Minister of Science, Technology and Innovation. So our next speaker is Miss Angelia Chin Sharpe, and I hope you can stick to your time slot. Otherwise, we'll be running out of time for questions.
I will be shorter.
Okay, Angela, no, yeah, go ahead, Angelia.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. I think thank you to the earlier speakers. They've done an excellent job in terms of providing the data and the information for us to understand the biodiversity risk that we're talking about that will have impact to all of us. So for that, I'll move quick to slide 6 because they've already done an excellent job. So if you look at because I'm coming from the in the panel, I'm the only one who's representing the financial institution, and I'm actually representing the asset management industry of the financial institutions, just to be clear. So in the financial institution platform, we talk a lot about the SDG goals, but a lot of times we don't understand that, or we don't realize that 80% of the SDGs are reliant on biodiversity for the delivery. So if we do not pay attention to what we've discussed earlier by the previous speakers, that will have a big implication in terms of our ability to actually meet SDG goals. Nearly half of the world's population depend directly on natural resources for their livelihood as a given. Thus, we do understand that biodiversity loss will have significant impact to society, especially when we talk about food production. Move to the next slide, please. So we do recognize that business cannot be as usual. Is this the right slide? Business cannot be as usual. It is mentioned that 44 trillion of world GDP is moderately or highly dependent on nature and its services. Hence, if we continue to treat biodiversity as we are, and as as it's already mentioned that humans are the cause of what is happening today, we are talking as an investor, we're talking about that is the value of risk that will have a great impact to our investments. Next slide, please. So therefore, as a financial institution at BNP Paribas Asset Management, early last year, we actually launched the Global Sustainability Strategy. So what does that mean to us? Why we are doing this is because we have a role to play in terms of climate risk, as well as to also address the biodiversity discussion that we have discussed earlier. Next slide, please. So this year, what does this global sustainability strategy mean? Basically, what we've done is we have fully integrated ESG in the way we invest our clients' assets globally. We also believe that ESG will improve risk-adjusted returns to our investors. But a lot of people always think that ESG comes at the expense of performance, but we have proven that that's not true. And we also believe that engagement is critical. Being a large asset manager where we manage more than €500 billion euros of assets under management, we have a voice to make a difference, to build a sustainable and inclusive economy through an engagement with companies, policymakers, and a wider society. And that's why it is important that we should play a role in terms of addressing climate change as well as biodiversity issues. Next slide, please. So we expect companies, when we talk about responsible business conduct, we expect companies to actually meet their fundamental obligations in the areas of human, labor rights, protecting the environment, and ensuring anti-corruption safeguards wherever they operate. It's already clearly discussed that if we don't have this responsible business conduct put in place, it actually has it actually accelerates biodiversity issues that has been discussed earlier. You move the slide. Can you move back to their slide first? As you can see in the responsible business conduct, we also have sector policies that we have put in place. What does that mean when we put in place sector policies? Basically, this will provide a guide for us in terms of screening requirements and engagement with companies. We believe that some of these sectors, if not conducted properly in terms of the activities in question, it actually has a serious social and environmental impact, and hence resulting in biodiversity loss. Next slide, please. So therefore, we also believe that we need to focus on the 3 E's, which is listed on this slide. What does these 3 E means? We talk about energy transition, environmental sustainability, and equality. So we believe that we have to look at all these 3 E's while we also look at investments, because that also helps us to address biodiversity issue, especially when we talk about the water footprint as well as the forest footprint. So at BNP Paribas Asset Management, we believe that we want to be the future makers. We want to create values for our clients in integrating ESG and stewardship in our investment processes. Protect future performance by using our influence with companies and governments to advocate for a low carbon and inclusive economy. These are basically all the steps that has also been discussed by the previous speakers. So the next slide, please. So that's it for me, because we'll leave it for the panel discussion later. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Angelia. I'm happy that you stick to within your time slot. And then we have time.
Sorry.
I have a question for you afterwards, so be ready. Okay, now last speaker, not the least, Dr. Surina. You know Dr. Surina is a group head of sustainability at IOI Corporation Berhad. Dr. Surina, sorry.
Okay, just hang on. I'm trying to share my screen.
Yeah.
It's not doing it.
Yeah, you have started screen sharing now.
All right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Give 20 seconds. Yeah.
I will go straight to the point because we are short of time. So I think a lot of everyone has spoken a lot about biodiversity and all the technicalities. So I would like to give an approach from the companies or the corporation side. IOI is a agricultural company, so I would like to talk about biodiversity in the agricultural sector. Knowing that agricultural practices such as soy, corn, cattle, palm, they all impact the habitat and ecosystem services. But we require that to feed our population. And increasingly, we can see that in 2050, the population will increase from 7 to 9 billion. Can everyone see the slide? Can everyone see the slide?
No, we are unable to see your slides.
Okay. let me try again. Sorry.
No problem.
Can you see the slide now?
No, we see your screen, but not the slides.
Oh God.
Okay, let's click on the PowerPoint. So go to share screen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And okay.
Have you seen it?
Just a second. No. Okay.
There's a signal say you have started sharing.
Okay, now select at the bottom the screen that you want to share. Okay. Okay. No.
Hang on, I have no idea what's going on because it was all right when we first did it.
Yeah, well, we tried. Okay. Yes.
Is this okay now? All right.
Yes.
Way to go. All right. So, so in terms of looking at our sector here, the oil palm and the environment, I would like to point out that in terms of the average carbon stock, we looked at carbon stocks in rainforests, obviously it's about 200 tons per hectare, while oil palm comes about 40 tons per hectare, soybean and rice about 5 tons per hectare. So we looked at in terms of GHG emission. You can see that the amount of GHG emitted for production of palm oil requires about 8 kilograms of CO2, while you look at beef, for example, it's 21 kilogram CO2 emission. So you can see the impact of both palm and beef into the environment. But if you look at the oil palm industry itself, 10% of the global oil crop area, we have about 40% of the oil production. So in that sense that if it is cultivated sustainably, it is one of the alternative for us to feed the world. You're looking at the lowest land use per yield compared to other vegetable oils, and we need to do this with best practices so that it will be the best way for us to protect loss of biodiversity. So looking at from the IOI's perspective, I think it's important for us to explain to you first our approach to sustainability, because understanding how we approach our sustainability, you'll also understand how we approach integrating biodiversity within our operation. So the first thing that we do, of course, is to define our sustainability with our sustainable palm oil policy. We do that through engagement with stakeholders to get their feedback. We set up goals and commitments that are relevant to protecting, to sustainability within the group. And we establish systems and processes. And of course, after that, track the progress and communicate this action to ensure that, all these are met. We also adopt the 6 United Nations Sustainable Development Goals most relevant to us, which is Sustainable Development for 2, which is zero hunger, 8, which is economic growth, and 12, responsible consumption and production, 13, climate action, 15, life on land, and 17, partnership for goals. We are currently strengthening our sustainable palm oil policy by putting in additional commitments like mitigation of environmental and social impacts based on EIAs and SIAs, protection of rare, threatened, and endangered species, implementing programs for progressively reducing GHG emission, as well as utilizing the best management practices and strategy on mitigating climate change. We look at production of oil palm and how to mitigate the impact on biodiversity by considering these environmental matters. Of course, deforestation, reforestation, these are very fundamental aspects of where biodiversity resides. Rehabilitation of forests, peat and riparian areas, looking at biodiversity and wildlife protection, water, waste management and pollution control, as well as GHG emission, carbon sink capture, and footprint activities. in terms of looking at how we mitigate biodiversity from a practical approach, we have what we call environmental management guidelines, in which these guidelines will govern the way we operate. So we understand that where we reside, we have the risk of fire, we have the risk of peat being disturbed, and biodiversity and conservation being impacted. As such, we take several steps, for example, in terms of biodiversity, to have avoidance, and this is done by setting aside ACVs and ACS areas, rehabilitation, and this is usually following an impact. So for example, if there's any breach to the areas where we are protecting, so for example, if there's a fire, we will start our rehabilitation programs to mitigate that impact. In terms of compensation and offset, we look to replacing some of the lost resources. So for example, if there is an area where there is an animal corridor, for example, generally we would look into trying to provide an alternative so that that corridor could be preserved and look to develop at another area to ensure that there's a net positive impact. In terms of looking at the specifics of how we look into biodiversity and conservation, the first step that we took is by identifying the biodiversity and conservation value areas within our operation. So this we do by ACV assessment, by having stakeholder consultation, and then we proceed to go through execution and management. And this is where we set up objectives and targets for where we want to manage our areas of biodiversity. We also develop human-wildlife conflict management. And then we look into step 3, where we look into threat and monitoring and crisis management. And this is specifically when there is an issue of, say, death of a threatened animal like orangutan or elephant. And this is where we have active communication and participation with the relevant stakeholder to help to mitigate that issue. We develop integrated management plan and data management using smart tools, and also to do crisis and threats mapping to ensure that we know how to deal with the threat in future. Finally, we do impact evaluation and mitigation protection. And this is very, very important because we always need to find out what is the root cause for why a crisis management or threat happens. We need to reevaluate our indicators if it's not achieved. We need to establish adaptive management strategies to resolve the issue that we have been facing. Of course, a rehabilitation program will also be instituted whenever necessary. In terms of looking at integrating biodiversity within the oil palm operation, I would like to share with you this video, and this is a video of elephants in our plantation. This is during the wind plantation exercise, and you can see that we understand that elephants like to eat the inside, some parts of the plant when we tell them. And we do this by monitoring them, and they are very used to this. And this is part of their whenever supervise this, monitor that there is no danger, all to them. Equipment chipping away at the and the elephants are eating the food very, very peacefully. So going back then, looking at some of the activities that we've been doing, we have been collaborating, for example, with Hutan and Pongo Alliance for orangutan population and its coexisting. We find that orangutan who lives very close to the forest reserve and our plantation, actually uses our plantation as a means for them to migrate from one area to another. And we have been working very closely with Pongo Alliance to identify this orangutan population, and we have also been training our people to ensure that this is done very safely. We have also, as you see, collaborated to translocate elephants back to their natural habitat for those that have so accidentally moved into the plantation areas or into the communities close by. In terms of looking at rehabilitation program, this is very important because a rehabilitation program involves the species, the plant species within our within the areas of conservation, and we have collaborated with communities to undergo protection and rehabilitation activities. We have worked with, for example, the Cagar Alam Muara Kendawangan. This is in Kalimantan, to rehabilitate the buffer zone. We have worked with degraded palm peatland areas in Bukit Lilau and Pahang to rehabilitate that area ravaged by fire. And we have also think that environmental education is extremely important, because this is a landscape approach. We need to make sure that the communities living around the areas of conservation also understand the importance of conservation and protection of biodiversity. In terms of looking at the key points in summary, I think this is related to what has been voiced out by Dr. White about what can cooperation work to ensure that we can protect and integrate biodiversity. So one of the things that IOI does is we increase our productivity and yields, and this is done through tissue culture and increasing the performance of our seedling, so that we can address the rising costs, and that's the economic side. Deforestation, because then we can use the same amount of land but have higher productivity, and this in turn protects biodiversity and soil erosion and offset climate risk activities. We also think that it's very important to be involved with the government-supported tools and approaches. This is like the mandated certification schemes like MSPO. I think that's an excellent example of how the government can help to uplift the whole palm sector into something like sustainability for the whole sector. We are also involved in the National Policy on Biodiversity, which was organized by the Ministry of Natural Resource and Environment, as well as part of the ACV Malaysia Steering Group. And this is very important because the findings will be used to, when we do a revision on the MSPO, these findings on the ACV Malaysia will be incorporated into the new elements of the Malaysian Sustainable Palm Oil.
Okay, Surina, can you try to close, please? Yeah.
Yes. So I think there's a whole points here. So I think since I'm short of time, I will say that we commit to expanding only into land with low carbon storage, with attention to biodiversity and communities' need during land development, and to ensure a balanced approach of conservation versus development. So in summary, I would like to say that there is all parties must share the responsibilities of protecting biodiversity loss. And I think the consumers can be in the driving seat, because they are the one who can push everyone to promote sustainably produced products, and thereby ensure that our planet are protected as a whole. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Surina, for a very informative and interesting presentation. Especially you share with us how you integrate the whole environmental dimension to your practice. Yeah, I think excellent. Now, ladies and gentlemen, now we can start our last session, that is our panel discussion. And I think we do receive a number of questions, but I see at least two from the Q&A panel. And I think the first question is, I saw the earlier questions. I think I wanted to give that question to Angelia. something to do with, let me see. What this Benny Yong, I think, if I recall his name. How do you assess the economic value of the biodiversity? I think that's the question, if I can phrase it. I think that was the first question posed in the Q&A panel, but somehow or other I lost it.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Angelia, yeah.
I think how we look at when we invest into companies, we do provide scoring. We do our ESG scoring into how we analyze companies, and part of this ESG scoring is not just about talking about the environment, the social and the governance issue. We also our sustainability research center out of Paris also look in depth into the I mentioned earlier in terms of the business conduct. So just as we take IOI as an example, it's not just about you know how the palm oil is being produced and harvested and how they treat the land, to the extent of even what is actually put into the soil for them to actually for the plant to actually grow. So we look to those extent and not just what is being published by the companies, and then we provide a scoring, and that's how we will then decide whether we should invest in those companies or not. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, can you repeat the last sentence? We lost that.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
So we, through our ESG scoring methodology, we then you know, decide whether should we invest in a company or not.
Yeah. Okay. Right. So now we have a second question. This is addressed to all panelists, and to see whether who could take up this. Sound like Dr. Surina. Excellent session here. Thank you so much. How can FSC in Malaysia, National Office for Forest Stewardship Council, contribute to this very important initiative and BCSD's work in general? Who would like to take that? Maybe Tan Sri, Zakri?
Repeat the question again. I was not paying attention.
Yeah, okay. This is a question. How can Forest Stewardship Council, Malaysia, contribute to this very important initiative? Basically what we discussed, I suppose, and BCSD's work in general.
Well, it's for the council to respond to that, you know. But yeah, from my viewpoint, and also BCSD, I think the time is right for the business sector to play a constructive role in the conservation and management of biodiversity. And also, it's not just from the perspective of the environment, you know, but it's more than that. It is so crucial. I think Helen or Peter White mentioned earlier about COVID-19. COVID-19 is how tragic that is, but it's a godsend. Why? Because it points out to the crucial nature of the environment. After all, if science is to be believed, the virus originate from the disturbance of wildlife habitat. You know? And again, Chair, one thing, as governments scramble to provide economic stimulus, they tend to forget the central issue here, the destruction of nature. They'll go for stimulus package, socio-economic, you know. We have no problem with that, saving life and promoting human well-being, but please, it's about time that nature be considered in a big way, mainstreaming, as someone said just now. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Tan Sri. May I go to the next questions? I think this question very specific to Dr. Surina, but because IOI is mentioned, this question from Paul Wong. IOI, like the other, position itself as the champion, I think, for CPO Malaysia, and saying that CPO Malaysia is sustainable, but this position being challenged by EU, and I think they're very adamant about it. And this impasse is seriously prolonged with little reconciliation in sight. And whether Dr. Surina, would you like to comment on this? I know the IOI has done, maybe I would say, a leading plantation company in Malaysia on this subject. Thank you, Dr. Surina.
Well, thank you for the question. It's a very good question. I think the issue is always whether or not the message of sustainable palm oil has been passed on. There has been a lot of misinformation that has been sent outwards. And I think there must be a concerted effort for us to share our sustainability practices. And I think if you look at it, we have been working with the European Palm Oil Alliance, as well as the Sustainable Palm Oil Choice. And we have been sharing with them some of our sustainability practices, and they have been working together with a lot of other actors within EU to get them to understand what is actually happening. So there is a difference that we need to identify. We need to make sure that sustainable palm oil is the message, not just palm oil, sustainable palm oil. And I think the work of MSPO, for example, is a very good example of how we can balance social obligation, which is the smallholders, and sustainable obligation, which is the planet, for us to move forward in terms of making sure that there's no real alternatives. Because if you were to use other oils like rapeseed or sunflower oil or soybean oil, the amount of land that you would have to clear will be a lot more. So I think this is the message that we have to continue having engaged with the EU. I think the issue is more about biodiesel rather than the use of palm oil, sustainable palm oil. I think that is starting to change, but of course we need to work a lot more on it. Thank you.
Okay, so I have one question to Dr. Peter White. What does business need from others, particularly the government, to help scale up nature positive solutions?
Thank you. I think I mentioned earlier the asks from business for nature, and I think they're fairly simple. What business needs is firstly, we need a clear target. In that, I mean, in the climate debate, once everybody agreed on 1.5 degrees C, that gives everybody a target, and then you can have science-based targets for business linked to that. We have never had that equivalent for nature. And there is work afoot at the moment to try and create what is the 1.5 degrees for nature. Because if we can agree that as the North Star, then everybody knows which direction we are traveling in, and everybody can work out what they can do to contribute. So the first thing is we need the clear apex target, like a 1.5. The other clear thing, I think, is the joined up nature of this issue. And that cartoon I showed, I think, is key. We won't solve the biodiversity issue alone. That's why we haven't done it so far. It needs to be linked to the finance discussion on prosperity and livelihoods. It needs to be linked to the health discussion, and it needs to be linked to the climate. So it has to be about climate, nature, and people. So we need a joined up approach from governments. And the third thing that is key is incentives, because at the moment, people are paid to cut down forests, that people are paid to destroy biodiversity. They are not paid to conserve it. And so there are many perverse subsidies at the moment. We need to identify those and redirect them so that they are paying towards nature positive actions, not nature negative actions. If we can have it so that, as I think BCSD Malaysia says and WBCSD says, if we can make it so that more sustainable companies are more successful and get rewarded for it, then the water starts to run downhill as opposed to us always trying to push the water uphill. So incentivize the right behaviors is key. And they are the sort of policy asks that we need coming out of both the CBD COP in Kubing, but also the climate COP in Glasgow.
Very good. So Peter, I think many of us share your thought on this. I think the economic intervention is very important, as well as follow-up by the financial aspect. I still remember the late Dato Sri Dr. Lim Keng Ye, you know, and he said, Malaysia is willing to keep our forests if you're willing to pay for it, you know.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
yes.
That's the language he used, you know, in the early days. So maybe it's something we can have to work along that line. Absolutely. And although we have passed our scheduled time now at 5:34, but I think I just got the signal from the Secretariat. We have another 10 minutes to continue our question and answers. I want to be fair. I think I do have also a question to Dr. Helen Nair. I think this is very simple questions. I know many students nowadays, they opt for ITs, ICTs, you know, law, you know, MBAs, but very few of them want to take up, say, taxonomy, for instance, right? You know what I mean? Yeah, there's very basic biology. But the question here is that are there sufficiently trained personnel in Malaysia to ensure precision biodiversity to succeed? So that's the question to you. I think we have enough critical mass at the moment. Can you unmute yourself, Dr. Helen? Unmute yourself.
All right. Is that okay?
Yes, we hear you. Yes.
Okay, good. Thank you very much for that question, Dato. I think this is an extremely important issue, and it is one of the big challenges inside our precision biodiversity program. If we do not have enough trained personnel who can handle emerging technologies, then we are in a bind. But with the biotech and biosciences, we've been building that up quite solidly from 2005. Now, what is on the plus side is that we are now rolling out the 4.0 IR program, you know, so industrial revolution. So with that, the country is geared up for it. What we have put forward inside our program is that the education system needs to have a bit of a change where people are enticed to, and the curriculum is revised to include emerging technologies along with the knowledge of biodiversity, so that the person coming out has a handle on both areas. That is the only way we will be able to get the right type of people, the right type of human capital. So this is part of the exercise that's going inside our program, that we would like the education curriculum in schools to be revamped, because right now people are finding it boring to go into biodiversity or taxonomy and those sort of areas. But if they are also introduced to the high end or the exciting and the oomphy sciences like emerging technologies and know how to link that with biodiversity, I think they will be excited. Genomics, you know, all those new terms, the omics will excite them. That's what we want to get done. Thank you.
Okay, excellent, very good. Okay, I think I need to come back to Miss Angelia, right? Okay, this is a question that popped up on my head, right? Now, actually in Malaysia, we have a lot of these areas still under forest, and they are also state forests. To me, they are essentially unmanaged, you know? Nobody managing them, right? And I do think the state departments of forestry and others have the capability to manage them properly. I mean, even to understand what, you know, the abandoned, you know, species there, you know, what is the ecology there, you know, I mean, not fully understood. Now, my question to you is that if somebody or an considered to get the financial sure support from the banks? Yeah, how the banks would treat, what kind of considerations?
Sorry, I missed that part. I think you're talking about whether there's whether we are allocating capital to addressing.
To get approval, the state to manage such unmanaged area. I'll say not unmanaged area because nobody really managing it, right? And then subject to intrusion, poaching, all kind of thing, right? But we have this entity, non-profit, were to approach a bank. Would a bank consider such a proposal?
I think, sure. I think a lot of this is again about awareness. We need to. There's a lot of talk about climate change, climate risk, and stuff like that. But there's not a lot of talk about the risk of biodiversity loss. And you're right. We want to. If you're talking about the financing world, then of course they need to have a payback in the sense of the return aspect of that, the profit aspect of that. And we've done a lot of sukuks. We talk about green sukuks and stuff like that, where we are, financing things that are, trying to green the building and stuff like that. But why not a green sukuk that is addressing biodiversity? It can be addressed if managed properly, if structured properly. That ultimately there's a return. There is also social bonds and social sukuks that's already been launched, like the Khazanah social sukuks. So maybe it's time for us to look at structures like that address a biodiversity loss. And it is very important. As long as it's structured in a way that there's a payback to it.
So I'm happy to hear from that. I think we need to structure. Everything needs to be structured. I think that's a good point. So we shall continue to work with you on this subject, right? And others also, right? Actually, in Malaysia till today, we still face our water disruptions, thing like that. You know what I mean? And I think this is the lack of governance, There's another subject. I think if you were to manage the whole river basin, basins that could provide, I think we might be able to change the question of governance of this area. Okay, so now we have 4 minutes left till 12:45, not 12:45, 5:45, right? I was thinking about the Emirates time, sorry. Okay. Maybe I have 1 minute to every speaker to say what you like to say to leave a lasting impression to our audience here. Okay, maybe I start from the bottom. First, Dr. Surina, 1 or 2 sentences.
Well, I'd like to thank you for inviting me to present this. And I hope that the audience are able to understand that biodiversity is actually integrated within our operation. We do believe that in terms of how we integrate, it's not just within our operation, but also on the wider landscape. And this is where we have stakeholder engagement with our communities, with the forests, with other corporations that are operating alongside to make sure that we can have minimal impact and contribution towards biodiversity loss and ecosystem services. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Surina. Okay, next, Ms. Angelia again. 3 sentences.
Yes,
3
thank
sentences.
you, Dato. Yes,
the most.
I think there's a lot of talk about addressing the temperature, the climate issues. And yet, to be honest, in Malaysia, we are far from achieving those targets. And then we have these biodiversity issues. So I think platforms like these are excellent opportunities for us to bring this awareness to everybody. And as discussed, it's not just about the finance sector, the business sector, but the community at large and the society at large need to understand what does this impact has onto their lives, and it's real. So whether we like it or not, it's time to act. Thank you.
Sentences. Can you unmute yourself? Yeah.
Who is it? Is it me now?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, I hear you.
I'd like to go back to what was mentioned earlier about giving a value to biodiversity. Inside our precision biodiversity, we have put forward biodiversity banking, which then recognizes the efforts that people are putting into preserving biodiversity at the same time getting involved with some business activity. And this incentives that was referred to by Dr. Peter White is also something that's built into that 8 I's framework. So unless you got that, physical as well as non-physical incentives for the people, especially for the orang asli, etc., who are in the jungle, and we want to look after their needs too, we cannot get very far. So this is my final word on that. Thank you.
Peter?
My turn, 3 sentences. Yes. Firstly, nature is everyone's business.
Okay, very good.
Secondly, mainstreaming is key because we have to have nature in the decision-making process in business, but also in government.
Excellent.
Thirdly, join the call to action for Business for Nature and work with Malaysia BCSD through their projects to help solve this problem.
That's the best part. Okay, thank you, Peter. Okay, Zakri, you have the last word. You're the chairman of Business Council Sustainable Development. Zakri.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for giving me to have the last say. I only have one phrase.
Yes.
Earlier in my intervention, I proposed a Malaysian platform for business and biodiversity. I think in view of the rich discussion that we had this afternoon, this would form the basis of a program of work under the so-called platform. We'll make sure we engage all of you and enlarge the group. I think with the support of the World Business Council on SD, their vast experience in this, it would be a game changer for Malaysia. So once again, just remember the Malaysian Platform for Business and Biodiversity under BCSD Malaysia. Thank you.
Thank you, Tan Sri. Well, now my time to close this session, and thank you for everyone for your engagement in this very exciting forum. I believe this has been a fruitful and productive session for all of us. We also appreciate your interest in learning more about business case for biodiversity and ecosystem services, as they are essential for us to move forward toward a sustainable future. We too are looking forward to seeing all of you again in the near future. And stay home, stay safe, do stay in touch. Thank you and see you again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Dato.
Everybody.
Thank you. Yeah. Looking forward to see you again.